Hi, this is Bob Brown, and welcome to my Facebook and YouTube channel. Today was very enlightening for a lot of reasons, and I wanted to talk about complexity science. This is the framework I use for my doctoral study, and I'm going to hold up a very simple phone here with a keypad. And this has a lot to do with this story, because what happened today is we had put a very expensive digital, and this is just a facsimile of the unit that we have, but we put a very expensive digital conferencing phone where I work at Indiana Limestone. We put it in there. It worked for many weeks, and everyone's moderately happy with it. It's a little bit of a fiddly system, but it has very high fidelity sound. And suddenly it stopped working. So the symptom was they take the receiver, they dial the number, and they dial into their conferencing call center, and then they have to put in their PIN code and press pound, the pound key here, or hash if you're British. And so what happened was they would type the number, they dial the number, and the system would connect through. And this is also going through a via IP office system out through a Comcast PRI into the internet. So this is kind of voice over IP with a digital conference phone. And all of a sudden, when they put the PIN code in, the numbers were all wrong. So the first thing you think is, well, the keypad's got to be bad, right? I mean, and then you look and see, well, the numbers look good, but this, I must be, when I push these buttons, it must be a bad keypad. Well, that's what I thought. That's what I would have thought instantly. It's kind of interesting, though, what goes along with that. And what goes along with that is what I call the bias effect. Because anybody in tech has experienced the bias effect where people basically look at you like, he doesn't know what the, hell he's doing. Doctors get the same thing, auto mechanics. Anybody, if you're in the business of diagnosing, someone's going to say, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You know what? Sometimes you're absolutely right. But you have to start somewhere. So my first diagnosis was, it was the keypad went bad. Well, then people told me, well, we've already done some experiments, or they've actually tested some things, and they'd gone to another digital phone, very different unit, and they dialed, and the same thing happened. When they put the PIN codes in, the computer on the other side started reporting like random numbers. I went and put an analog device into this system. I went from digital to analog because I want to say, okay, let's go out of the digital domain. Maybe there's feedback, something's going on. Let's go to an analog circuit. Same thing happens. Well, the users were kind of ahead of me, as they usually are, and I was plodding along, catching up as I usually do. So finally I caught up and said, well, something's going on here. So, but of course, the implicit bias is I'm a dumbass, or the keypad's bad, or both. The keypad's bad, and that guy there is a dumbass. And this is how a lot of problems happen in business, medicine, relationships, you name it, is this misdiagnosis. The diagnostic techniques should be based on neutrality, scientific neutrality. We're here to discover what's the problem. So you want to have a diagnostic neutrality, a therapeutic neutrality, and basically a restorative neutrality. And not restorative like I don't care, but it's more or less the implicit bias should be, we want things to get better. I want your business to succeed better. I want the patient to get better. And in technology, we can move you from the norm, because the norm may be failing. We can move you to what we'll call a hyper norm, where you can super succeed. But it's interesting that this simple keypad, how it affected my mind and my diagnostics. And it's interesting because I was convinced the keypad was bad. And then the users told me, well, we tested another phone that did the same thing. I said, wait a minute. Then it can't be the keypad. See, my brain had hooked onto this. I attached to this because I wanted a simple answer. I just wanted a simple answer. Give me a simple answer is what the human brain says. It's got to be this keypad. We'll order a new one, we're done, right? Well, wait a minute. They tell me we went to another phone, a totally different device, and it does the same thing. Okay, now the complexity, and this is why we have the map of complexity here. You see dynamic systems theory, complexity science, fractal geometry, and chaos theory. All this is what happens when you're trying to diagnose a problem, whether it's a medical problem, like, for example, which I show ad nauseum, I'm trying to diagnose the Chiari malformation in my brain, which is a herniation. It's a genetic disorder. It's a herniation of the cerebellum and it can cause many, many health and mental health disorders as well. And I've really had to educate other people, because when people see you, they basically come with the same thing I have, is I just want a simple answer. Give me a simple answer. This guy is faking, he's lying. See, it's simple. It's just like this keypad. It's just a junky keypad, get a new one. Long story longer is that as I had to dig into this, I had to call Comcast, and Comcast did a great job. The lady on the phone was fantastic. And she says, well, this might be a carrier-to-carrier problem. Well, I never thought about that. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, well, you're dialing out, if we dial this number I keep talking about from an AT&T cell phone, Verizon phone, no problem. But if we dial out through Comcast, and they're a telephone company as well, we dial out from there, we're going to a conferencing center. Now, this conferencing center may use multiple carriers to reduce their costs. So they may have brought in a new carrier, maybe Sprint, or maybe some company we don't know. It could be a large-scale company. And they brought it in, and now Comcast is trying to send these digital codes across carriers. And these two carriers are not meshing. There's echo problems, dial tone problems, things of this sort. We have a visitor here now. Dr. Osiris will be giving lectures here shortly. But thanks. And so anyway, let's put you down for just one moment. Oh, he's a pretty heavy cat, by the way. He's upset now. And so now we went through this complexity map, self-organization, adaptation, emergence, dynamics, and systems. And I'll go through all these one by one eventually in the long series. But it shows the problem. We want a simple answer. It's just this keypad. Now, the Comcast lady said, I'm moderately sure that your on-premise equipment is functioning normally. I'm moderately sure. That's kind of a Bayesian term. She's not, I'm 100%. She said, I'm moderately sure that you don't have a problem with your keypad and your local PBX and your local lines and your local wiring in your building. And by the way, you're okay too, Mr. Brown. You're not the problem either. I said, well, I appreciate hearing that. She said, I think this is a carrier-to-carrier problem. So again, we had to broaden our knowledge, because our knowledge was really narrow-banded, like, well, it's just a bad keypad. Now we're into complexity science between communication systems that are vast, between Comcast's vast phone network and maybe Sprint. I don't know if it's Sprint or not, but let's just say it is. And so Sprint and Comcast are not signaling these codes properly. So she said, well, it's going to take several days for me to work on this. What did I get out of this? Well, I've been doing a lot of complexity science for my doctoral study, and it shows me how lazy I am. Just how plain lazy I am as a human being. I'm a lazy person, because this was a simple answer. It's keypad. And I was willing to almost accept kind of this implicit, well, you don't know what the hell you're doing, Brown. Because that's an easy way out too. Just accepting blame is an easy way out too. Inflicting blame on other people, that's an easy out too. So those are diagnostic, that's the poverty of bad diagnostics and what it does to your problem solving skills. It makes you impoverished with your problem solving skills. What I've learned in the last couple of weeks over brain science, it's amazing. I went from, I'm just a crazy person, to I'm a person that has a somewhat rare brain disorder. And as I've said in other videos, once you understand what's going on, you can start adjusting your behavior. You start learning more. You expand your knowledge. And you can start solving the problem. You're not just saying, well, I'm just crazy, or this keypad's just bad, or that guy doesn't know what he's doing. And I think in business and in life, this happens far, far more than we want to admit. That we just make snap decisions based on faulty data with faulty thinking patterns, and we make really bad decisions. And these decisions can be catastrophic in nature. So I urge you to learn more about complexity science. And here's the map of complexity science here. And I urge you to learn more about it. The study of complexity systems is an emerging discipline that has not developed a consistent theoretical framework. And basically, as they point out in this, there's all kinds of feedback mechanisms. So when you encounter a difficult problem, it could be a relationship problem, It could be a medical problem. It could be a scientific problem, a technological, engineering, architectural, hydrological, oceanographic, biological studies. These systems are vastly more complex than we fully understand. I'm more into cybernetics and business, and they're complicated because, I went from, my little brain was stuck on a keypad to now we're into very complex intercommunication signaling systems between Comcast's PRI lines and, I keep saying Sprint, the Sprint system. And that there's complex communications between these vast, huge arrays of computers and Cisco routers and Barracuda routers and, ADTRAN multiplexers and compression algorithms of signaling. All this is woven into this. And then it was my job. I had to go back to, my supervisor, and people say, well, I think we now have a deeper, murkier problem. And of course, no one wants to hear that. But I think this murkier problem seems to be communications between these two systems. And that's what the Comcast lady said. So it do not accept simple answers. If there's a simple answer, great. But sometimes it's easy to accept simple answers and walk out when you didn't really solve anything. I've heard on this Chiaria, I have Chiaria malformation. I've heard constant people on the internet talk about how they were misdiagnosed, and how people had all kinds of surgeries. One poor woman, she's on the Mayfield Clinic site. She had a breast reduction surgery. I mean, I don't even know how they arrived at that kind of thought process. Well, it's the same way that Mr. Dumbass here, how I came to the process, well, it must be this keypad. I guess it's that keypad, so that's how we're going to roll. And so you really have to stop and think, really, am I accepting an easy answer, or am I accepting what my knowledge knows? Because we are constantly now in a world where our knowledge is being stretched to the limit. And you have to accept the fact, hey, I just don't know these answers. I can go figure it out. I can learn. Or I may have to say, at this time, I don't have the data to make any plausible decision that would make sense right now. Now, you may be forced and say, well, I got to do a decision. Well, the probability is this is the least likely way of failure, so I'll take this route. People had, it's really heartbreaking what people did. And it's easy to blame the doctors. And they do deserve blame, like I deserve blame for this stupid keypad thing I keep talking about. But really what we're dealing with here is we have not really adapted the science of diagnostics, become therapeutically diagnostic and recover, restorative is the word I'm trying to get out, restorative neutrality. So we want to be diagnostically neutral. We want to be therapeutically positive, and we want to be restoratively very positive. That's in business, that's what we want to do. I want to be diagnostically neutral. I want to see it scientifically. What's the problem with this business? In medicine, biology, mineralogy, any science, geology, science, whatever it is. I want to be diagnostically neutral. I want to understand. Now I want to be therapeutic. I want to restore the business. I want to restore the employee to their job. I want to restore a market. I want to restore, an old factory in a wasteland that where it used to be thriving. Now I want to have a positive impact by being therapeutic to rebuild this, and I want to have a very positive impact on restorative. That's the model you have to move through. You have to move from neutrality for scientific purposes, then therapeutic, I want to help this business thrive, and then restorative, I want to restore. And that restorative may be in business, for example, or business processes. It may be not keeping what you have. It may be building something entirely different that, hyper leaps this business into the future. Same thing for restoring a patient's health. So this was a very interesting case of my failings today, of how I went for a simple answer. And you can see here all the complexity around me. So I went for the simple answer. This little unit had nothing to do with the problem. Now we're into very complex systems. If you're doing brain theory, it's the same thing. You're in incredibly complex systems. So it's easy to say people are crazy or they're no damn good and all this, but what does that mean? It means nothing. It's just an easy cheat. It's an easy cheat to say people are crazy or they're no good or they're bad or nothing can be done for them. And that's why the prisons are full of people. That's why people don't get mental health care they need, because it really should be, I don't have the expertise, but let's figure out a way to get you to the proper help. Same thing for a business. You may not like the business. You may not like the business person that's sitting across the table from you. But you have to be diagnostically neutral. You say, well, this person's trying to build a solar cell business. He's not a particularly nice and likable person, but he wants to employ 200 people. Well, that's got a lot of value. So I'll have to become diagnostically neutral and try to be therapeutically positive, because I may affect change in that person, even though they may be, somewhat, of a scurrilous nature. And then the restorative effect is this community that was falling apart. Now there's jobs and families are coming back and people and the environment's being cleaned up and things of that sort. So that's a long-winded discussion on the impact of complexity science and how simple answers are in many ways dangerous. So you have to ask yourself in a Bayesian term, how positive am I of this? Do I have low? I have moderate. I felt moderate about it. Actually, I felt when I first saw this, I would have said there's a high probability this is a bad keypad, because again I had a bias like, well, this system's kind of a piece of junk anyway. Oh, by the way, I'm the one that put the system in, so I'm kind of a piece of junk too. And that's exactly how I felt. I had like a feeling of depression, like, man, I picked this system and look at it, it's failing. So again, all that was unnecessary emotion, unnecessary thought process, but walking through it, which I did today, and I forced myself to walk through it all the way from right from this keypad, from the finger touching it. Was I touching it correctly? And I walked it all the way into the complexity of the Comcast network and to the interconnection of these giant carriers. I found a totally different answer than I expected. And then I took myself out of it. I'm like, well, this had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with the local equipment. So it's a long-winded discussion on complexity, science, and thought, but I thought I want to share it because too often all of us make very bad decisions based on extremely faulty logic, faulty thinking, faulty data, or just no data at all. Just basically pulling things out of the air. Just whimsical thought process, wild surmises, and based on nothing. So learn more about complexity science. Be less likely to, don't put yourself into the problem if you can help it. Pull yourself out. Be diagnostically neutral. And that means I'm here to observe phenomenologically the scientific problem, and I want to take it where the data leads. And that's what I did today. And usually my old mode would have been, I'd have just got hung up on this, or I just would have gave up on it, or I'd kind of sloughed it off like, well, this isn't that big of a problem, even though the senior management team was like, hey, we want this fixed. So I had to elevate it. But honestly, if I could have got away with not fixing this thing today, I'd have just kind of sloughed it off. That'd been my normal mode. But learning more about science, learning about the brain issues I'm dealing with, I'm like, no, let's pursue this where it goes, and let's see where the data and the information takes us. And it took me to a direction I never would have thought of before. So anyway, I wanted to share that. It's a long-winded discussion, but it shows how the brain works, how future studies on brain theory, complexity science, business problem solving, that's where I study a lot of things. And my last point is that's why I look at these artificial intelligence systems to help augment our decision process, not to supplant us, not to take precedent over human decision process, but to help guard us against or have a touchstone against when we say, well, this is what I think this problem is. And then basically all of us now will Google things, and Google will give us certain answers. But we need a more narrow-banded, we need a more focused system for our business, like a Google of our business, which you can actually do, by the way. That's another video. And to start having a system say, well, the probability of what you've just said is only 30%. This probability may be more like 70%. And make decisions more scientifically and objectively. This has been Bob Brown, and thank you.